ES Audio.
From the Evening Standard in London, I'm Rochelle Travers, and this is The Leader. Another blow for the Met. The Police Inspectorate has revealed that Scotland Yard is failing in its efforts to get rid of rogue officers and reform its vetting procedures, saying it's still making dreadful recruitment moves. The watchdog has warned that the Met will miss some key targets in an update to its landmark report in November, which previously found the force guilty of institutional racism, misogyny and homophobia. Matt Parr, His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue, described some cases they had uncovered as, "You cannot be serious. You are really letting that person in?" Martin Bentham is the Evening Standard's Home Affairs editor. Martin, can the Met Police ever get it right?
I think they do get it right on many occasions. They arrest lots of offenders and get them convicted and do many other things right. What's in the public eye and has been today and what has been in the public eye more recently is obviously where things go wrong. And in particular, in this case, where the wrong people get into the force and are not prevented from getting into the force when they should be, which is the case in some instances, and on other occasions where people who maybe should have been allowed into the force then do things wrong within the force and still remain within it despite what has then happened. And that's the focus of today's update by the Police Inspectorate, an initial report in November, which was very, very scathing indeed about this follows police forces nationwide, in essence concluding that it was far too easy for the wrong people to get into the police and to stay in the police, and that this was the result of failures of vetting, not identifying problematic behaviour, overlooking things like criminal convictions and so on of people coming into the force, and then not acting again on things that have happened when officers were within forces to deal with misconduct and to remove those who should have been removed. This isn't particularly surprising given what we know about the Wayne Couzens case, the kidnap, rape and murder of Sarah Everard, but in particular the case of David Carrick, where Sir Mark Rowley has said himself that he should never have been allowed to join the Met. He was allowed into the Met when there were already concerns and allegations against him about his domestic abusive behaviour. There were ongoing several complaints and allegations subsequent to that, and that was a particularly graphic case of action not being taken against somebody who clearly action should have been taken against, and he should have been removed from the police much sooner and perhaps been unable to carry out some of the hideous crimes of rape that he did carry out. But those, unfortunately, are not only the only incidents that have occurred within the Met. So there are well-documented problems even before what the Police Inspectorate had identified in its report last year. And today's report looks at how forces have been progressing in implementing a large number of recommendations that they were all given to deal with and to improve their vetting processes, their misconduct processes, and in essence to ensure that the right people get into the force and remain in it. And today's report from the Police Inspectorate says that although the Met has achieved many of those recommendations and is on target to achieve others by the deadline that it has been set to do so, there are some where the grading given to them in a sort of bar chart is red, i.e. they're not expected to hit the target and to implement the recommendations as they should do. So that's a warning to the Met. And at the same time, the Inspectorate has looked at 10 forces, including the Met, and found that in several of them, it doesn't name specifically which ones, but there are continuing what the inspector who I spoke to today described as dreadful errors, dreadful decisions being made about allowing people in, vetting decisions that were had your head shaking and hard to explain and hard to understand how somebody could have been allowed in.
Has the Met responded to the progress report?
Not as yet, although no doubt they will be, and maybe even as I'm speaking, there'll be. The Home Secretary hasn't said there should be no excuse for not implementing the recommendations that should be that have been made. So she says here the government is driving forward work to improve culture, standards, and behaviour, and so on. And it says that good progress is being made. And she says, but there can be no excuses, and I expect all forces to redouble their efforts to implement all of the inspector's recommendations by the deadline set.
Is there an end date for when the Met has to sort these issues out by?
The recommendations, they had different, each of the recommendations, there were about 43 altogether, not all of them to the police, one or two to other bodies, but there were certainly, I think, 9 in respect of vetting, another 18 for each force in respect of misconduct proceedings, and a number of others as well. And so each of those had a deadline of either the end of March or the end of October. So in essence, it's the end of October this year, which is in essence a year from when the initial report was produced, that all the recommendations should have been implemented.
Let's go to the ads. Stay there to hear more from Martin Bentham about whether or not the Met can ever fix its issues. Welcome back. Still with me is the Evening Standard's Home Affairs editor, Martin Bentham. Martin, rogue Met police officers seem to constantly be in court at the moment and in the news. Is this a good thing because they're actually being found out? And should we expect to see more cases for the foreseeable?
We should certainly expect to see more. And in essence, well, it's a bad thing and a good thing, isn't it? It's a bad thing that they ever happened and that these cases have to come to court and so on. But as Matt Parr, the inspector who carried out today's report, and said to me earlier on, he said that should be seen as a sign of progress in essence, because it's a necessary clean-up. It won't do the Met any good to have these negative stories out and about repeatedly with new examples of officers doing the wrong thing. But if you're trying to clean up a workforce, then clearly, unfortunately, that uncovers some bad things. And the more that is uncovered, in essence, it's good because it's uncovering what's gone on before and people doing things in the past that were wrong. Clearly, I suppose it becomes a problem if it continues to be the case that more and more people are being found who are continuing to do bad things within the force. That becomes more of a headache. I think at the moment, it's bad for the image of the Met to have these cases. But in reality, you only can clean up something if you actually tackle the problem. The easiest way to pretend there is no problem is to not deal with it, and that actually leaves the problem festering underneath, behind the scenes, doesn't it? So, which clearly is, in essence, what Sir Mark Rowley would say has happened before he arrived, that there's not been a rigorous enough approach to some of these cases, and that some people who should not be with the force have been allowed to remain with the force, and that now he's trying to tackle that. And of course, in some cases that just involves a misconduct hearing and a dismissal that way. Other cases it will involve an actual criminal prosecution for some misconduct of one sort or another.
How would you describe public opinion of the Met currently?
It's very hard to say. I mean, certainly the surveys, that public opinion surveys that the City Hall does, the Mayor does, have shown a dip in public confidence in the Met. Clearly, there's still a lot of people who have confidence in the Met, and it's like depends on your personal experience of them, doesn't it? To some extent as well. So it's absolutely clear that the public confidence has taken a battering and therefore has been weakened and diminished. But at the same time, there is still some public confidence in the Met, and a significant number of people, I think, would still have confidence in their ability to deal with some of the things that they're confronted with. And I think, frankly, I always find it hard to speak on behalf of everybody else, because trying to work out what public opinion is a notoriously difficult thing, isn't it? But the evidence does suggest that public opinion, public confidence has been shaken in the Met by what's been happening, and it will be a slow process, I suspect, before it's rebuilt.
And do you think the Met can fix its issues by the October deadline?
It won't fix all the issues by October. I mean, it can implement recommendations, but then you've got to, there are two things, aren't there? First of all, you've got to implement the recommendations, but secondly, you've then got to actually make sure that those recommendations, which ultimately are only policies or ways of going about things, are actually delivered on the ground by the individuals. And that's a whole different challenge again, isn't it? That if you're talking about vetting decisions, you can have very clear guidelines about who should be and shouldn't be let in, but then each decision comes down to an individual or one or two people. So you need to make sure that they're applying those properly and doing their job on an individual level. And that's, frankly, a little bit harder for the Met to do because it's a big organisation. And unfortunately, you will always find that occasionally there are likely people doing things that they're not meant to be doing, even if you've got the right policies. So it can make progress by October. It can, but I don't think Sir Mark Rowley or anybody would really think that it's going to be a perfect organisation by October. or indeed sometime going forward. It'll take quite a while, I think, for it to really get itself on a better footing.
You can find out more about this story on our website, standard.co.uk. And that's it from The Leader. This podcast is back tomorrow at 4 p.m.